Dare we open Pandora's mystic box?
To every generation, a slayer is born, except this time there were 6.
This is the dimension of imagination. You are entering the mystic zone.
Do you ladies see that aura? Something wonderful this way comes.
Welcome to the Mystic Order Podcast. I'm the Queen of the Mystics. I'm Gail.
And I'm Margie, the Mystic Illuminator.
And I'm Joanne, the Mystic Defender. And in the defense of the 3 mystics who are not here today, Katie is off with her husband, which is a good thing. Marianne was having a little problem with allergies, and she decided not to be sniffing and snorting during our podcast, so she is not here. And Mary, whose podcast we're going to do today, is off with her grandbabies, and there can't be a more wonderful thing or place to be.
So we're half the mystics, and I've been nominated to take over for Mary because our subject today is notebooks.
Yay.
And I don't keep a notebook, so it's kind of odd that I'm taking over for Mary. Mary keeps a copious notebook, and a little later in the podcast, I'll read to you about my not keeping a notebook. But we have got Margie, and we've got Joanne and Mystic Gail, so half of us are absent.
And I think those of us that are here, I have kept a notebook, but I never do it consistently. I always remember is Mary, that one of the first times we met, she was talking about how she keeps a little notebook in her purse at all times just to hear those little tidbits of speech or conversations. And I will always remember, this is crazy, but she said that she remembered sitting in a sub shop or someplace, a dinner shop, and that she heard some lady who was angry about her order going up, and Mary wrote this down, and she told the waiter or the waitress, "I read name tags." Now, this is a crazy thing, but it was something that stuck in my mind, and I think that's why some people do keep a notebook, to get those little tidbits of conversation that
I totally don't understand this. They were in a sub shop?
You're in a Subway shop.
Oh, a Subway shop.
A Subway shop, and Mary is overhearing this conversation, and she said this big lady got up, was angry with her order being not right, and went over there to complain about it, and then told the server, "I read name tags."
Is that all she could read?
That's all. Well,
She's
it may
taken
have
her
been.
name.
But it was just such an unusual thing for anyone to say that she put it down in her journal.
She, the big lady, put it?
No, Mary.
Okay.
Mary
put
overheard.
it down in her journal. Yeah, so
Well,
that was
I read
wonderful.
name tags too.
Right. Well, but did you write that down in your journal?
Well, there's the problem with the Gail. And of the 3 of us here, I will say that the person who journals the most is Margie. And I really enjoy seeing her journals when she comes back from Italy or Vietnam. Margie,
Thank you, Gail.
Margie,
Yeah.
why do you keep a journal?
Well, I've kept a sketchbook journal, and I combine those because I'm a visual artist. Really, my high school art teacher, Mrs. Katie Koleski, who was the most wonderful art teacher, encouraged us all to keep a sketchbook and encouraged us to draw every day. And so I started doing that in high school. I probably did it before because I love to draw, but not in a kind of form like that. And I've continued it my whole life, sometimes more diligently than others. But I've used it to record observations, to just draw for pleasure, to practice my drawing, to prepare for teaching. It always seemed a more interesting way to do kind of research, is to write it down, draw it. I remember being in high school reading Dante's Inferno, and I drew the stages of hell so I could remember them. And I drew people that I hated in each stage of hell.
And that's the wonderful thing about being an artist.
And my English teacher saw it, and she said, "Well, that's quite creative."
Well, this is a total aside, but it doesn't have anything to do with notebooking. But I have a friend who has a Christmas tree with pictures of people she hates on them. So the people I hate Christmas tree.
Well, maybe that's a form of her journaling.
Well, my friend Mike Hall, who's professor of English, used to have a burning an effigy party every February, and we would all bring whoever we wanted to burn an effigy, just a little image of them, and have it in his backyard, which was filled with planter toilets. He would take old toilets and use them as planters.
Well, they're going to be the only thing left after the great apocalypse anyway,
Right.
so might as well have something growing in them. Absolutely. Well, and as we've said, Mary is a big journal keeper, and she gave us a word to go by, hypergraphia, and that is the compulsion to write things down. Although I think I do have a little hypergraphia, unfortunately mine is not trained as well as Margie's and Mary's. I keep journals for a while and then I fall off, and then I keep them for a while longer and I fall off. Mary also gave us this wonderful essay by Joan Didion,
Yes.
I'll say it right, on keeping a notebook, and she wonders why she keeps one as well. But she, like Mary, keeps those little tidbits of interesting conversation or a snapshot of somebody. I think one of them was a lady walking out of a shop with a mink, and she said how that the skins were not quite to her liking, and how she knew that I don't know, but
The first like sentence of that on keeping a notebook by Joan Didion, she's reading something from her notebook, and it said that woman Estelle, the note reads, is partly the reason why George Sharp and I are separated today. And then she puts dirty crepe de chine wrapper, hotel bar, Wilmington, railroad station, 1945, August, Monday morning. And then she goes, I have no idea
why I
what
wrote
that was about, but it was supposed to have been, and then she kind of remembers. So I think,
But what a great scenario to start a short story even. Yeah.
What are some of Joan Didion's books?
You want us to
I read
read literary.
a last memoir that
I've
was
read
quite depressing.
I've read a bunch of Joan Didion, but I can't remember.
She
what.
wrote one, a very poignant one.
Well, this is from Slouching Towards Bethlehem, The White Album,
The White Album.
Salvador, Miami, After Henry, Political Fictions, Fixed Ideas of America Since 9/11. Yeah, and Where Was I From?
Margie, one thing about your being so involved in your sketchpad journals is you're an artist, and we mentioned earlier before we actually turned the mics on that Frida Kahlo
Yes.
did hers and did a notebook, and a lot of the paintings she did in her notebook turned out to be the start of bigger pieces of art.
Right. She kept a journal the last 10 years of her life, and it's published. It's called Frida Kahlo, An Intimate Self-Portrait by Carlos Fuentes. And the journal is quite beautiful because it's her actual journal, 10 years of journaling, which is drawings and thoughts reproduced, and then in Spanish and then translated into English. And if you remember one story from that I really thought was very interesting, if you remember her painting the two Fridas, do you guys remember that one of her, the heartbroken Frida after Diego left, and then the whole Frida
Left for her sister.
Yes, for her sister. He was quite a creep, but she hung in there. But the story she writes about the two Fridas, because I always heard it explained, the happy and the sad Frida. When she was a little girl, she writes that she had an imaginary friend. And she would sit in her garden where she was from, Coyoacán, her house, where she was born and died in the same house. I mean, she ended up living there at her death, too. She would blow on a window pane and do a little circle, an O, and then she would, in her mind, step through it into a garden, and there she encountered a little girl who did not speak but understood everything that she was saying. And she would tell this little girl all of her feelings and thoughts, and then after she felt very much not alone anymore, and then she would exit by the little hole and come back and feel a great sense of peace. And she always said that she did so many self-portraits because she was the only one who knew who she was.
My
I thought
son,
that was very
Fascinating.
interesting.
my son had imaginary friends that lived in the park. We had a little park where I used to live.
Uh-huh.
I loved the names of his imaginary friends. They were Betty Lewis, first name Betty, middle name Betty, and Jet. And also he named every one of his stuffed animals Jet.
I had a dog named Jet.
And Mrs. Robinson.
Oh, Mrs. Robinson.
Mrs. Robinson. So those were
Was
his.
that before or after The Graduate?
I don't know.
It's very
I can't
creative.
remember.
Well, my brother, I think I mentioned it in a previous podcast, maybe, had an imaginary friend named Tom William. And Tom William ate dinner with us. My parents just went along with it. Tom William has a motorcycle. Tom William. And Tom William, I still ask my brother today, how's Tom William? He said, I guess he's okay.
My son had Kirby, my oldest son, and the way our lives worked, I took Jeremy to daycare in the morning, and Jimmy picked him up in the afternoon because he got off earlier, where I could have the option of going in later. Buckle Jeremy in, and Jimmy's starting to pull out of the parking lot, and Jeremy screams, "Start the car!" So Jimmy slams on the brake. What's wrong? He goes, Kirby had hold of Kirby was outside, had hold of the door handle, and was running alongside. So we'd stop, open the door, let Kirby in, and go. Those imaginary friends are real. Let me tell
They're
you.
pretty powerful.
And maybe that's something we should write down in our journals.
Well, when we were talking about that we would be doing a podcast on journals, I was sort of wondering what on earth I would say, so I wrote a little something in defense of not having a journal.
Okay, Gail,
And
go for it.
I'd like to read it. I find and I use this term loosely, diaries everywhere. I can't manage to put these in one spot, one journal, one notebook, although I have been gifted with many notebooks with interesting and beautiful covers that call to me. I resist. I find scraps of paper with deep thoughts and musing written in the early morning when my creative thoughts are rested and ready to wander. These bits of scribbles are everywhere. When I find them, I have absolutely no idea what is meant in my pen's meandering. I truly wish I could adopt the habit of keeping a notebook, as my memories slip through my fingers like sand. Doesn't that sound beautiful?
It
Salman
does.
Rushdie said it, not me.
Well, he's quite a good writer.
I know I'd be a better writer if I would only organize my thoughts in one tome. In my defense, I suffer from over-organization skills. If I organize one more thing, I'm going to have to go into counseling. Also, I've started incessant hand washing with the mean virus on the prowl.
There we go.
Soon I'll be hoarding lean cuisine trays. As a sidebar, I'll say that my sock drawer is amazingly organized. I can tell blue from black in an instant. Call me if you need some advice on this. Simply contained by hours of the day, something I have to let go. My vanity drawers aren't organized, for example, and I confess I do not journal. Our mystic Mary is a ferocious journaler. I wonder what she lets slide. I'm going to ask her.
Whoa.
That's almost a poem, Gail. That's great. You really should make that into a poem. That's wonderful. But you do journal because you have bits of paper everywhere. And I think it's just, a journal does not have to be organized. I was looking up, how do you journal? And Steinbeck, he journaled after every day, he would just write down his progress on his novels. And that was his journaling.
Yes, but Joanne, when I find my little pieces of paper, I don't know what they mean.
And that is what Joan Didion said. She has no earthly idea of what they meant.
Oh.
It's like writing down your dreams. It's like, golly, that was a great dream. What does it mean? But another one, and this reminded me of Mary, was for all you techies out there who want to journal. He said, tweet just a short line to yourself every day.
Mm.
And then at the end of a week or at the end of a month or at the end of the year, take all those tweets and write them out. He said they're poetry. So some just odd ways of doing
A
it.
real stream of consciousness.
Yeah, just
Kind
a
of.
string of consciousness, which Margie journaled on a pizza box coming back from Atlanta one time. So, stream of consciousness. Or try choosing one moment from your day to write in a journal, just one moment. But I think the more interesting journal is what we're talking about with Joan Didion, and that is something where you just see something, you hear a phrase, you see a person dressed, and you write that down for later use, possibly in some writing.
What I do is when I hear something, I go immediately home and write a short story. And whatever I was planning to do before that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And I think I told you about my friend that I used to swim with in the morning, Sheila, told me about a funeral she went to where the guy stood up and talked about his friend that was being funeralized, whose funeral it was,
Buried.
and he said, "We shared everything. We even married the same woman." And so I immediately went home and wrote one of my favorite stories ever just because of that little bit. But honestly, when I find
Dancing
these...
across the river Styx. I
Yes.
remember it well. It was memorable.
Well, you know, another thing about keeping a journal or a diary, I mean, and they are different and they can be different. If you're keeping like a diary of your most private thoughts, you always run the risk of somebody reading them. And I know that I did a presentation one time on journals, and the artists that I included were Leonardo da Vinci, of course, his famous notebooks, Frida Kahlo, and then Delacroix. And Delacroix, the painter, 19th century painter, romantic, started his saying, "I'm writing this very honestly because no one will ever read it."
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Have you ever had that experience, Margie?
Yes, I have. I was telling before we started the story of one time when I was in grad school, my car was stolen from my studio on 6th Street. And it was an old, like 1964 Plymouth. I couldn't imagine someone stole it. I thought it had been impounded. And then the sheriff from some county in North Georgia called me and said, "We've got your car and we've captured the thieves because the car broke down and we got them. And I want you to come up here because we all want to meet you. We've been reading your journal." And my journal was in my trunk. And it was my drawings and my most intimate thoughts and poetry that I was trying to write. And when I walked into the jail, they were, "Now look here, young man, this is the woman you stole from. She writes so beautifully." And I was so embarrassed because, but I didn't want to say, "How dare you?" because they did have my car. The starter was all messed up. But anyway, so
Did they fix your starter?
No.
they did, and I had to have it towed somewhere back to Atlanta. But that was really a little bit depressing.
Well, they say there is a difference, though, between a diary and a journal. Now, I have kept many a diary, and you're right. If anybody to ever find those things, and oh my God,
You know it.
especially now that I plan on running for president. But
Don't let it worry you. You haven't been grabbing anything you shouldn't have, you. If y'all remember the last time we met or the last month's Mystic meeting, I read to y'all a story about David Diamond from my diary.
Oh, right.
Where
Right. I love that story.
I had fallen in love at junior high school age with David Diamond.
Mrs. David Diamond, Mrs.
And
David Diamond.
I wrote his name in my diary I had an ink pen that you could put different color cartridges in, and I chose lavender.
Of course.
And I
That's
wrote his
right.
name over and over and over in my diary.
But
Yeah.
like Gail said, a diary is a book that you record the events of the day. But a journal may be used to explore different ideas, I think, as far as testing the waters or having those little bits that just make things, so wonderful to write about. Because we don't always, real writing, good writing, you catch a voice. And lots of times it's hard to do unless you hear that voice elsewhere. It's almost like a language.
I think the interesting thing in that Joan Didion essay was that her little writings brought back whole scenes to her
Yes.
that she created. And she also said that she didn't know that she ever wrote the truth, because whenever she told a story, she told it as she remembered it. And friends and family would say, well, that didn't happen.
That's true, no matter what.
Right.
You
So, but
Oh,
that's
yeah.
what she was saying. She always had this imagination that went along with whatever she observed.
What do you remember Katie's poem about she and her sister? About having the
right.
different memories, I think it goes, and there was the cat. What cat? I don't remember a cat. And, and
That was in my book.
yes.
Bright Illuminations, yeah.
Yeah. And so she, even in the same families, looking at the same thing, you do have different memories. But you're right. The journal parts of it would bring back ideas. But then there's where the fiction would take in, and there is where the imagination would take in. I think Marian, although I don't know that she specifically has a journal, but she must have a wonderful memory, because a lot of her writing starts
With
that
Jernigan,
way.
Alabama.
Well, in Jernigan, and they're her memories.
Yeah.
They're her
Yeah.
memories,
I
little
often-
bits of this and that.
I do wonder, and I'll be reading another writer who has wonderful memories, even of dresses their mothers made them when they were 7. And,
yeah.
and I cannot remember. Salman Rushdie said something about that. I'm going to read it to you. Never forget that writing is as close as we can get to keeping a hold of the 1001 things: childhood, certainties, cities, doubts, dreams, phrases, parents, loves, that go on slipping like sand through our fingers.
Yeah. And that is true. And our memories, and Lord knows, I always say that your mind gets so full of stuff when you're our age that it starts falling out of your ears. And so I forget probably more than I've ever known.
If I can't remember it, I just make it up.
Well,
Well,
there you go. That's why we're fiction writers.
Yeah, my friend Carol said, you might as well make it interesting.
That's right.
If the truth isn't that interesting,
Absolutely.
just elaborate.
Absolutely. And who knows? Who knows?
Mary did send us a little quote from Melville on writing Moby Dick.
Ah,
Did y'all read that?
No.
did not.
I'll read you a bit of that. One often hears of writers that rise and swell with their subject, though it may seem but an ordinary one. How then, with me, writing of this Leviathan, I guess that's Moby Dick,
That's Moby Dick,
yeah.
yes.
Unconsciously, my choreography expands into place card capitals. Give me a condor's quill. Give me a Vesuvius crater for an inkstand. Friends, hold my arms, for in the mere act of penning my thoughts of this Leviathan, they weary me and make me faint with their outreaching comprehensiveness of sweep, as if to include the whole circle of sciences and all the generations of whales and men and mastodons past, present, and to come, with all the revolving panoramas of empire on earth, and throughout the whole universe, not excluding its suburbs. Such, and so magnifying, is the virtue of a large and liberal theme. We expand to its bulk. To produce a mighty book, you must choose a mighty theme. No great enduring volume can ever be written on the flea, though many there be who have tried it.
Say what?
And that sounds just like Melville.
Doesn't it?
You know
he
he
can
wrote
do a
that.
long sentence.
He can.
Say what? She lost me there.
Well, he just kept on thinking as he was writing, and it just, if you're writing about whales and sailing and conquering.
Yes, I know. Like I said, it sounded just like him. Have any of you ever done The Artist Way?
I've read it.
Have you read it? Did you do it, though? Did you go
I
along
can't
with it?
remember.
I did.
Where you have to
I
do...
should have journaled about it.
You should have. And that is the point that I'm coming to. Part of The Artist Way is you do the morning papers. And they're somewhat of journaling. It's really a mind dump, just kind of to free your mind of all those little trivial things, which probably is more like a diary. But it is a form of journaling. But it's not catching those little bits. I guess you could treat it as such, but it's not usually catching those little bits. But it is something you do every day. I take it you did not do. You read the book, but you did not do the exercises.
You read the book too, didn't you?
Yeah, I've read the book. I didn't do the exercises
Yeah.
every day. Well, another artist, cartoonist, Linda Berry, if you know her, she taught this great class, and I would recommend it to everybody. It's called Syllabus. And one of the things she had her students do was, it was her syllabus for this, and she combined art students, cartoonists, and medical students and writers.
And
all
medical
of these
students?
Yes. And
Wow.
she gave all of her classes names of the brain. parts of the brain like amygdala. They chose a name. It wasn't their real name. And anyway, that was just part of their creativity. But every day in their journal, they were only supposed to take 10 minutes. And they wrote like what they saw, what they heard, what they did.
Oh, yes.
And then do a little drawing of it. It was just an X. And they just, don't take more than 10 minutes, just do it. And then she would have them do cartoons from that.
So they answered to the name of a part of the brain.
Yeah, they didn't use their own names. They just, part of the brain or part of the body. But, like a gland or something, I'm thyroid.
This is
Gland.
totally a whacked out thought about
Oh,
all
she is
this.
she is if you've never read her cartoons.
No, what I mean is I was going to tell you something that's whacked out that this reminds me of.
Yeah,
It was an Auburn University guy who went to, I think, Korea, Japan, and was teaching school, and he named everyone in his class something Auburn, like one of the kids was named Aubie, and one of them was named Pat Dye.
And one was named Cam Newton.
Yes, Cam Newton. And they would start their morning doing Auburn cheers, and then he'd call roll, Cam Newton here, War Eagle here, Auburn Tiger here.
He didn't get homesick that way.
Did you see that?
I did. It was hilarious.
Well, back to Margie. So I did that for a while, Margie. You had given me, I think
right.
you had told us about that, what you saw, what you heard, and then just a little sketch. I always got bogged down on the sketching because even though Margie is trying to teach us how to draw, I'm still struggling with it. But that is, again, that's just a great way, just like the journal, to spark your brain, and to get, just a jumping off point. And I can see that would be, something else. And I bet you Marion has done this. She just seems like the type is, I have kept every letter that I have ever received.
Oh, my
Whoa.
goodness.
I know.
So has Tom Westmoreland, and he has them in alphabetical order.
Well, I can't say I'm that organized, but they, when I go back and read them, they're like reading journals. Because, you don't necessarily put out your most intimate thoughts in a letter. Usually it's, starting out, "Dear Joanne, I'm fine. How are you?"
Now, the person that does your estate sale is going to hate you.
I know. Well, I'll probably burn them before then. I know I might get hit by a bus going home today, but just know that, Jimmy Camp will burn them.
Well, that was a way of really communicating, back in our parents' day and even
sure.
before, because they didn't call each other on the phone. And I know my mother used to sit and read us her sister's letters from Kentucky. And then
Do you still have these?
My Aunt Dee. I have, what I did find, my sister and I found all of my dad's letters home to my grandmother during World War II.
See,
when
how
he was
wonderful.
in France. And it's where he met my mother. And he, in his letters, he says, dear Mama, I've met a very swell girl. She's a nurse that I met when I was recovering in the hospital. Her name is Loretta. And it was like my parents' courtship. And then and I may have mentioned this before, but during the war, my father, when he was in France, he adopted a dog, and the dog was with him, and he named the dog Ted, and his name is Ted. And I think it was quite odd. He named his dog after himself. Maybe he thought the dog would survive.
My father raised field trial dogs, pointers, and every one of them was named Ranger. He could have 8 dogs, and they're all Ranger. And I'm thinking maybe if you called them, they'd all come.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I don't know if they were Ranger 1 or 2 because I wasn't alive at that time.
Who's the boxer that named all his kids?
Oh, yeah.
That does the...
John Foreman. Not
Foreman. The Foreman Grill.
Yeah. All of them were named. What's his first name?
John?
No, it's not John.
No.
George.
They're all named George.
They're all named George.
Exactly.
That's
They're all
right.
named
George.
George
How could I
Foreman.
forget George.
Yeah.
That is... Anyway, but the letter writing, I do remember... I remember my mother and my aunt had beautiful handwriting. And it was so interesting to see their, see
Most
the
of the
letters
writing
that they
you
made.
see from before that time, my grandfather's writing's beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but they had to have beautiful writing when they were in school. They were trained. Now you don't have to do anything but type.
I can still go back and talking about handwriting. I think there is something, and this may be a mystic moment, there is something mystical to me about somebody's handwriting.
Oh, yeah.
I just think that there is something very special. I have done cookbooks, for example, for my sons when they were going off. And if I could, I would always include a recipe written in my grandmother's handwriting or my mother-in-law's handwriting or my mother's handwriting, just, photocopied to let them have that, because I think there is something very sweet and very, I don't know, just there's some power in there somewhere. Mystic moment.
It's how they used to
moment.
analyze people's personalities.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. And I think that there is a lot to be said of that.
Like Gail writing with her purple pen.
That's right.
Or lavender.
That's right. I can have good handwriting for about 5 minutes, and then it gets into the sloppy.
Well, and the other point of that story, of course, I wondered, was that most of the records, especially when you go back into, just the 1900s, a lot of records were handwritten. I'm doing a little genealogy now,
All
and
the
I
records.
can't tell you how many. Well, they may be on a form that was printed, but a lot of the records, I've searched deeds that have been entirely handwritten.
I found a deed in an estate sale last year that was like 1834, and it
Wow.
was from England. I'm trying to think the town, and usually people will buy these beautiful handwritten things and make them into found art, and it was just a shame if that had happened. It talked about the land he owned, and so I mailed it to that town, to their, what I thought was their archives, but it wasn't. It was a museum. But the archivist for the town got it, and he wrote me back. And I just wrote, I'm sending this to you. I didn't realize it was going to cost me $14 for this good deed, but it did. I'm sending this to you because if I sold it, someone would turn it into art, and it would be a shame. So the archivist wrote me back, we received this. We're so glad to have it. The only other copy is in London.
Wow.
And he says it's a shame. It would have been a shame to make this into found art. And
Yeah.
so I wish I could remember where I mailed this to in England, but I can't. I didn't journal it. I should have journaled it.
Well,
There
you
we
know,
go.
the thing I noticed too about my journals, I mean, I do this extensive journals, but how often do I ever go back and look at them? I hardly ever do.
And I, in a clean up or clean out, I will go back and look at some of my journals, or diaries for that part. But yeah, you're right. I think you hardly do. I wonder if
It's
Joan
kind of
did
the
that.
process more than the product, I think.
I think
You know,
it is too.
that you do that for that time.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I don't have to journal if we don't go back.
Well,
and
I mean, I
refer
still
to
Never
have
have to
mine. I have the product.
Yeah,
I just
but-
don't ever look at it.
go.
Yes,
Here's a
but
quote.
Margie, what good is it having if you don't use
Well, I
it? It's
just
like your
keep it-
sterling silver. If
Keep
it's
it with all my other.
if the sterling silver's in the attic, it's doing you no good.
Here's a quote for you. It says, like cilantro or Gwyneth Paltrow, writing a journal is simply not for anyone.
Everyone.
Everyone, yes.
I want to do a
And
quote.
there's nothing wrong with that.
It's from David Sedaris. I have
Oh,
two
I love
quotes
him.
of his.
I love
He
him.
said, I guess in my diary, I'm not afraid of being boring. It's not my job to entertain anyone in my diary. And then the second one says, I've been keeping a diary for 33 years and writing it every morning. Most of it's just whining, but every so often there's been something I can use later, a joke, a description, a quote. It's an invaluable aid when it comes to winning an argument. You can say, that's not what you said on February 3rd, 1996.
And there, Gail, is your reason for keeping a journal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, can I read my Billy Collins poem journal? Because I think
Yes,
it's very
please.
apt for our subject. So he's describing his journal. Ledger of my head's transactions, log of the body's voyage. It rides all day in a raincoat pocket, ready to admit any droplet of thought, nut of maxim, narrowest squint of an observation. It goes with me to a gallery where I opened it to record a note on red and the birthplace of Corot, into the tube of an airplane so I can take down the high dictation of clouds, or on a hike in the woods where a young hawk might suddenly fly between its covers. And when my heart is beating too rapidly in the dark, I will go downstairs in a robe, open it up to a blank page, and try to settle on the blue lines whatever it is that seems to be the matter. Net I tow beneath the waves of day, giant ball of string or royal. It holds whatever I uncap my pen to save. A snippet of Catullus, a passage from Camus, a tiny eulogy for the evening anodyne of gin, a note on what the kingfisher looks like when he swims. And there's room in the margins for the pencil to go lazy and daydream in circles and figure eights, or produce some illustrations like Leonardo in his famous codex. Room for a flying machine, an action of a funnel, a nest of pulleys, and a device that turned by water. Room for me to draw a few of my own contraptions, inventions so original and so visionary that not even I, genius of the new age, have the slightest idea of what they're for. I just thought that's a really great poem
really
about
is.
a journal.
And he
Yes.
thinks he's the genius of the new age.
Well, he's being his usual kind of self-deprecating self because that's how he writes. You
Yeah.
know, always with that kind of edge of criticism for himself or self-realization. You know.
Well, but I think what he's saying is that that's journaling is a way to be able to look into yourself and see how you're developing, or see what
I don't
comes
see
out
the
down
difference
light.
in journaling and diarying. I think you can just totally combine them and not worry about
Well,
it.
I do too. I don't think you have to define it or not. I think some people, like the man that Mary sent us, and I didn't write down his name, that had to write down every 5 minutes what he did. I mean, he was
Yes.
just as
Yeah.
obsessive compulsive.
He was hypergraphic.
Hypergraphic, yeah.
Yes.
You know, that would be kind of drive you insane.
The
Yeah.
only thing similar to this that I've ever done is I used to keep a list of favorite words from things I was reading, words I wanted to use again, favorite phrases. I just finished reading the library book, which is all about the Los Angeles Central Library that was a victim of arson. And I wrote down my favorite phrase from it and left it at home, and I couldn't tell you what it is right now if I had to.
But what's
Which
the book
is why
again?
you journal.
Huh?
What is the book again? That sounds like a
It's-
fascinating book.
Well, I'll certainly lend it to you. It's a library book, and
Uh-huh.
it's about the Central, which is a library in downtown L.A., and it was in a beautiful old building, and the author of this book is guessing about the arsonist. They arrested this guy over and over several times, and his story kept changing, but they never did convict him of setting this fire. But it was about freezing the books and fixing the books and all the people. Loomis was the most famous of the librarians, and his home is now a museum. Anyway, that's what I just finished reading, and I wrote down this phrase was about a lot of homeless people coming to the library. And at the end of the book, when the library is repaired, this author's in that library and helping. And they have, I think they're identifying homeless people that come in and how they can help them in other ways. And the quote, which I absolutely can't remember, is about how she's a little afraid of homeless people because she's wary of what the possibilities are and what they might do.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's so true.
Like set fire to the library.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the guy
Maybe
that,
accidentally.
the guy
but-
that did it or is thought to have done it was not homeless. He was an aspiring actor that was full of himself and must have been a wonderful liar, because everyone that knew him said, well, he just lies about everything.
And some people would rather lie. So they would rather lie when the truth would serve them better.
Well, you must know that from being an attorney.
Well, you probably get that daily.
I do. I tell
Do your
people
clients just lie to you all the time?
all the time. And I tell them, if you're going to lie to somebody, lie to the police. I've often said this, that if more of my clients were Catholic and would go and confess to a priest instead of to the police, we would have a better time as a defense attorney.
My son was born with a condition called extropia, where your eye goes out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when he got in the 3rd or 4th grade, we decided to have it fixed because his classmates started noticing it. But before that, if he told a lie, I would go straight out.
My sister had the same condition.
Would that happen to her if
Yes.
she told a lie?
Or if we got her very, very excited about something, we used to get her giggling and laughing about
And her
something just to
eye-
watch her eye go
Well,
out.
we shouldn't have.
That's so
Sorry,
cruel.
Arlene.
We should have waited
are.
through his teenage years before we had it fixed.
Here we go. Perfect getaway. Perfect getaway. Well, for those who want to start there's also all sorts of things that they say you can do as far as starting a journal. And this one intrigued me. It was called Keywords. And it said if you don't like to write a journal, say, hey, if you're a writer by profession and say, I spend all my day writing, that's the last thing I want to do is to have an assignment. It said, think about one word that would describe the last 48 or 24 hours. And just write that down. And there was a way, a cloud app that you can get to go and tell you how many times you use that word in the last year or the last 2 years. And I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, that could be a mystic assignment.
That could be a mystical moment.
Have we, speaking of mystical moments, have we mentioned that we're nearing the end of season 2? This is on the next to last podcast
I don't think we've mentioned
of
that.
season 2. And our next one that we will be broadcasting podcasting is on what?
Walk on the wild side.
Oh, we're going to walk on the wild side. And that's our last podcast before we take a much needed break. And the reason we need to take a much needed break is you can't get 6 women together easily many times.
Well, and we have because journaling has been so much darn fun, we have let our own journaling, or our podcasting rather, has been so much darn fun. We've let our own journaling and writing kind of go by the wayside.
Well, this is journaling.
You're right. This is journaling.
And we can go back and check this for facts.
This is mystic journaling right here.
Because I would like to check a fact with you right now. You kept telling us in one podcast that we did at the bookstore that your life was a marble. And I've thought about that. You said it twice because I edited it and I thought, my life isn't a marble.
My life is small as a marble. I run into people all the time from all over the world.
The size of a marble.
The size of a marble.
6 degrees of separation for
Gail.
Joanne.
I was going to say, and come on, Gail. Yeah, there's 3.
She's lost her
3
marble.
degrees.
I thought
3
it was.
degrees.
I thought she meant to say marvel.
Oh,
My life is a marvel, but she couldn't pronounce it, so she said marble.
She said
And
the
Gail, don't you
size. I think she
remember-
said the size of a marble.
No, she didn't.
Oh,
I said it is a marble.
She said, my
So
life is a
marble,
marble,
it's
and she
that
said it
big.
twice. The first time I thought she means marble, and the second time I thought Joanne doesn't know how to pronounce marble.
Don't you remember that children's show? It was called the Big Blue Marble.
Mhm.
Yeah.
About the world.
About the
That
world.
must have been, you were a child when I was, probably dating a Sigma Nu and going to parties.
We won't go there. Yes.
Well, I wish that the rest of the mystics had
I
been
do
here
too.
to share their, fabulous insights into this subject. But I think we've managed to carry on okay.
Well, Joanne, can you tell us where our loving and adoring audience can find us?
Our loving and adoring audience can find us at any of your podcast carriers at the Mystic Order Podcast. And if you've enjoyed our podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe. We're on Facebook. Just come find us at the Mystic Order of East Alabama Fiction Writers. It says we love to get mail from you. We love to hear from you to let us know whether you're enjoying the podcast or not.
And don't tell us if you don't enjoy it. We don't care.
That's right. But, or if you have just a burning topic that you would want us to talk about, we'll be glad to do that.
That's a dangerous thing to invite the public.
We don't
Or if
have
you'd
to
like
take
to
'em.
be on our podcast for season 3, let us know.
Oh my gosh.
I know. What an invite.
That's right. That's right. Well, do y'all want to mention a mystic moment before we sign off?
We can, or I can give you one more quote, and I love this one.
Oh, good.
Barbara Yulin, If You Want to Write, and I think the mystics have read that book. It's a book that was written on writing in 1938 and then republished in 1987 and is still very to date, if you will. And she says, keep a slovenly, headlong, impulsive diary. I'm going to start that. Thank you, Brenda Yulin.
Well, out there, I want you to remember,
Be the
the
flame,
flame,
not
not
the
the
moth.
moth.